To emphasize the point that the ocean is a large place, this is our largest panel yet. We will start with introductions, and if you can please also give a quick little description of your purview, of your mission, or of your programs, that would be great. And then we'll start with the questions after that.
Thank you. So I'll kick off. You heard me earlier. Jackie Wood, the Acting Executive Director of the Joint Program Initiative for Oceans and Seas, JPI Oceans. I should say I'm here with my colleagues, Catherine Angle-Hansen, Strategic Director of JPI Oceans, and also with Uli Wolf, who's the German member, one of the German members from the Management Board for JPI Oceans. So don't feel you have to direct all the questions just to me. There's a escape valve there. Thank you. So the Joint Program Initiative on Oceans and Seas kicked off in 2011. We developed a strategic research agenda, and now we're really putting in place actions to take that forward. We're interested in the oceans and seas, from the deep to the surface to the atmosphere, and from the further open oceans right up to the coasts and the impacts of the oceans on land. And this the sort of title and vision is around achieving healthy and productive oceans and seas and contributing to what we in Europe call the blue growth agenda, the economic opportunities that arise from our seas and oceans. And that in itself is extremely broad. In our research and innovation agenda, we have 10 strategic priority areas ranging across marine and maritime technologies, deep sea exploration activities, through to things like marine spatial planning. Where do we install how do we get the best use of our oceans? Where do we install wind turbines and all those sorts of things? And then right the way through, as has already been touched on, to the food security and marine biotechnology interests. A couple of illustrative examples just to give you a feel for that. We've been working very actively now with some projects on microplastics in the oceans. When these kicked off at the management board discussion level 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't really a topic. Now you can hardly move without hearing about microplastics. And we have four very successful projects going on, looking at how microplastics weather in the oceans, where they come from, how as a research community we can calibrate the measurements and exchange data that we use. On deep sea mining, ecological aspects of deep sea mining, which is also a political high priority issue. We are producing research work which is featuring in Nature and Science, and which is informing the codes being developed by the International Seabed Authority. So we try to build these science policy interfaces into our work as well. Both of those, by the way, I should say, have been mentioned by the G7 in statements that they've given. We're also interested in marine maritime technologies and sensors. We have a large 30 million programme currently running in collaboration with the European Commission through something called a ERANET co-fund on marine and maritime technologies. And later this year, we hope to put in place 35 million euro project around the blue bioeconomy as well. Really struck with some of the discussions we've had with colleagues in the last few days about how we present what the impacts of the oceans in the different agendas, the impact of oceans into health, the impact for the economy, the environment, for energy security, food security and the like. And that's something I think we've already learnt. So that's a brief overview. I'll stop there for a second. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Rick Murray. I am the Division Director of Ocean Sciences at the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation's mission is to support basic science. And there's, of course, a continuum between basic science and applied science, or basic science with societal relevance. But the National Science Foundation really addresses as its fundamental orientation is basic science. Now, in the ocean arena, as it were, I'm responsible in my portfolio for basic science programs in chemical oceanography, biological oceanography, physical oceanography, marine geology and geophysics, ocean technology, ocean education. And then also on the infrastructure side, because like many of the fields that we've been discussing over the last several days, big science costs big money. And in the ocean world, small science, unfortunately, also costs big money. So I also oversee all the research vessels of the academic research fleet that are run by the academic institutions. We also oversee the Ocean Observatories Initiative, also the International Ocean Discovery Program of scientific drilling, and several other aspects. And one of the things that's very interesting about oceans overall is they're kind of the great international uniter. Of course, I'm biased in my view of loving everything about the oceans, but it's fundamentally an international field. I mean, many of the JPI orientations are, because science knows no boundary, bacteria knows no boundaries, and so on and so forth. And that's very true with the oceans as well. So we engage the international community through the scientific drilling program, for example, through CLIVAR, Climate Variability Program, and several other large-scale initiatives that require international engagement. It's not a luxury. It's a requirement. It is a big ocean, but it's a small planet, and we all live on it at this point in time. And so therefore, in order to address those large-scale, societally relevant questions, but from the basic science perspective that NSF enjoys and speaks to its mission, requires international engagement. And that's one of the reasons that we're here. And again, I thank you for the invitation. One last point I will say before I turn over to Terry is we at the NSF, we engage very closely with our other federal agencies, in addition to NOAA, but also the Office of Naval Research, NASA, and a host of other agencies to a smaller extent. But the 4 N's, as we call ourselves, NSF, NOAA, NASA, and ONR, Office of Naval Research, we have a lot of collaborations as our different missions sort of fit together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. I'll turn over to the other jigsaw puzzle piece here, Terry.
Well, thank you. My name is Terry Schaefer. I work for the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration and primarily in the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, working on international collaboration, primarily in Europe and with the EU. But I'm also here on behalf of Craig McLean, the NOAA Assistant Administrator for Oceanic and Atmospheric Research and Acting Chief Scientist, and his apologies he could not be here today for this event. I want to talk a little bit at first about what NOAA is. I think there's some understanding, I think, across the audience here of what NOAA does and what it is, but I think its mission statement can kind of capture it in a real nutshell. And really what we're responsible for, our mission is to predict change in oceans, coasts, weather, and climate. So that's a very large mandate to predict these changes in the environment. And we do it on scales from tomorrow to decades to even longer time periods. And I think I like the way Craig McLean, the acting chief scientist, likes to coin our mission through 4 questions. How many fish are in the sea? We have to answer that on a regular basis. We're required to answer that. Secondly, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? What's the weather going to be in a year, in 10 years, in 1,000 years? Should we be building on shifting sands on our coastal regions? So if you look at these questions, and you can see they're reflected in the NOAA mission, but this is something that we have to do in NOAA every day. Now, I work on the part of NOAA that's focused primarily on research, and there's research that occurs across all of the NOAA line offices, but the largest share is in the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And as Rick so aptly put it, oceans are global, and we can't really complete our mission without engaging international partners to help us to do the job of answering those 4 questions. And so I've had the pleasure of working with the European Union on the Galway Statement on Atlantic Ocean Cooperation between the United States, Canada, and the EU, and Craig McLean serves as the U.S. co-chair. And that's where I became aware of Horizon 2020, and that was a huge learning curve. And then the JPIs, and it's been a real pleasure since November when we had the meeting back in November 2016, and even before that in meetings with Jackie, to learn about the joint program initiatives in oceans and to pursue this. And I'm really happy this meeting came to be. I want to thank Berna for her efforts in making this happen. Thank you.
Thanks. And you already know me. So I am the president and CEO of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, or COL. And we are a nonprofit organization. We are a consortium of 95, as I count it today, ocean science and technology institutions, including academic institutions, industry, aquarium, and others that are involved in ocean science and technology, including a few international organizations. So we are, one thing we do is that we are the non-governmental voice of ocean science and technology, and our biggest mission really is to shape the future of ocean science and technology and research in partnership with others, federal and otherwise. But we're not just a voice, we also have other means by which we convene the ocean science and technology communities around important issues. We provide, if you will, also the table by which you can lay the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, because you can't put them together if you try to do it in your hands. So we provide a platform to convene around that. We also manage programs that are funded by federal agencies, programs that are funded by private institutions and by industry to, again, advance ocean science and technology, whether it's managing a major science program with multiple participants under the National Science Foundation or Navy, or it's convening around ocean observations, or some of the education programs, including a high school ocean quiz bowl competition called the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. So you can see that we really represent, because we are not government, we have special flexibility, and we are unique in our ability to really manage programs and to convene multiple ocean organizations to achieve the kind of results that we're now looking for and doing with the joint programming initiatives. And as we went through the day in previous meetings, the alignment of our priorities is clearly in much synergy and synchronicity, and we have great opportunities going forward. And I think it's important to have non-federal entities involved in this, as well as federal ones and government ones from international partners.
Great, wonderful. Actually, Jonathan, don't get too far away from the microphone. My first question is actually for you. Representing a non-governmental organization, what is your interest in seeing governmental agencies that fund research in the ocean and marine to collaborate? Why do you want them to collaborate?
Well, as a consortium, many of our institutions are either funded by or fund in partnership with the federal agencies, a lot of ocean research. And we all understand the importance of ocean science and the need for it, especially right now with things that are being talked about and that these three folks talked about. So going forward, really the importance of being able to have a non-governmental entity is to create the space in which you can bring people together in a non-threatening environment. You can have a voice that is not sort of, it's not controlled by governmental entities necessarily, but it's really an economy of scale as well. Because it's, and sometimes they say, you say that the ocean is really hard to model. You start with the hydrostatic equation, and how do you actually depart from that in time and space? It's really hard. The only thing harder than modeling the ocean is modeling the ocean agencies in the U.S. federal government, as Rick Murray alluded to. So if you come in as a JPI or another nation and want to figure out who do I partner with in the U.S. in order to really collaborate, you need organizations which can answer that question and help to solve that equation. That's the value of organizations like ours, to be able to provide the opportunities to do the good work that needs to be done for the reasons that we've talked about.
I would just add, it's certainly a nonlinear equation when you're dealing with agencies.
Just to comment on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I do think that's absolutely important, and because what we see, particularly in the ocean community, is we're very reliant on big infrastructures. We're reliant on long time series scientists who've been going out and looking for things for many years. A lot of that, although it's ultimately funded by the agencies, that expertise, the knowledge, and the infrastructures sit within the institutions, And in order to get a join up, we need to mobilize those. And so we need those links in to really make that happen. And that's where I think that's important.
Wonderful. This week, you have all had different chances to meet, not necessarily all together, but you are here together now. What are the topics of interest that you have found for collaboration?
Shall I start?
Well, it was interesting as we went through, we met on Monday, and we had a rather in-depth and long set of meetings on Monday at the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, but very, very fruitful. We were lucky at NOAA. We had 13 representatives come from NOAA to participate at representing 6 different thematic areas within NOAA and cross-line office, so not just purely in the Office of Oceanic Atmospheric Research where I work. And I don't know that we necessarily came to a decision on any joint activities at this point, but we certainly, I think it was very interesting to take a look at what Jackie presented about her strategic research activities or strategic areas as it relates to their strategic research and innovation agenda, and you look at NOAA's mission and goals and priorities. And I was kind of outlining kind of what we saw here, but if you take a look and do some cross-matching, you'll find that there's commonality in deep sea research, coastal and maritime planning, observing, modeling, and predicting ocean states, climate impacts on physical and biological ocean processes, ocean acidification impacts, food security, and there also, when I looked at that within the framework of the Galway Statement on Atlantic Ocean Cooperation, I once again saw a lot of synergy there for supporting that. So I was very pleased with that, and I think as we move forward, we'll be able to start to address this more in depth as we go back and begin to speak with the folks that were participated and also engage further in NOAA in further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just add to that, I think we also look not only just looking at the where, but also the how. And while some of the agencies are not in a position to bring new money to the table for collaborations, new calls, I think there are lots of opportunities to collaborate in terms of sharing ship time and generally exchanging data and information on the oceans. And I think I'd also put it, Terry, in a more global context as well, because there are a lot of wider agendas out there, the sustainable goals, the 2030 goals, not just one on the oceans, but how oceans impact into health, into energy security, and the like. And also, we are very lucky now that the UN is designating an international 10-year ocean decade from 2021 to 2030. I know that's 9 years, but there you go. But already the planning for that is kicking off. So I think there are also opportunities for us to work together to inform the planning and the subsequent execution of that ocean decade, which has been really important for us all.
If I could follow up on this, if I may. In addition to the subjects that Terry in particular mentioned, I would also just like to point out a less quantitative, less specific feeling that I got or benefited from, namely one of reassurance, in the sense that many of the issues that we're looking at here in the United States from either our perspectives from one agency or another certainly overlap. And while choosing my words somewhat carefully, it is an interesting time to be a scientist, and a scientist whose lot of portfolio falls into the climate arena in this day and age. And so I found it very reassuring to, of course, I knew this intellectually, but hearing it and seeing it, it's very reassuring to see that other people care about these things and other countries care about these things as passionately as do we. And I was speaking with several people from the audience here earlier today, and I understand that they had very productive conversations yesterday at the U.S. State Department. And I just wanted to thank our colleagues from JPI for coming over here and helping reaffirm the centrality of science, of course, ocean science, the centrality of it to the human experience. And I think that's a very important point. and the diplomacy of science has historical successes, and we, of course, hope that there will be future successes in the diplomacy of science as well. So I know that's a subjective answer, but I also think it is a extremely important point to make, which is why we need to keep having these conversations. So when specific opportunities come forward or specific challenges come forward that might be very focused due to a storm or some incident going on, we all know each other and we know who to call, you know, and we're not throwing business cards around the table for the first time meeting each other in a particularly acute, challenging time period. I would just like to do one more point, if I may, a little more specifically, in the sense of specific topics. Again, from National Science Foundation's perspective of basic science, we have a very active Office of International Science and Engineering. And Chuck Estabrook is here in the audience representing them. And we also have other directorates, such as engineering and the biologists who are engaged in this as well. But there is also strong overlap. If you just pick two of the things that Terry said, let's say deep sea mining, and let's say plastics. The National Science Foundation does not have any program specifically targeting those two areas, but we're very interested in ocean circulation, and that's how those plastics move around. And we're very interested in benthic ecology and establishing an environmental baseline. And so there's ample room for basic science research in these highly crystalline subject matters that are of very rich societal relevance.
We have time for one question from the audience. Okay, we're just on time for a break then, actually. Thank you very much.
Thank you.